Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first session of this morning and hand over to Graham Neal from Smart Cities.
Excellent. Thanks, Tony. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session on accessible smart cities. So I'm Graham Neal. I'm editor of Smart Cities World. We are a title that looks at how cities are solving the variety of urban challenges that we all have. So technology and data, they're really central to a city's evolution to becoming truly smart. And this, as you know, has a huge opportunity to improve quality of life for people with disabilities. But it's something that also risks widening inequality if the right approach isn't taken. I'm very, very pleased we have a brilliant panel, I think, to kick today off. Joanna Wooten is a consultant and former director of the Business Disability Forum. She's currently chair of Transport for London's Independent Disability Advisory Group. Renee Perkins is founder and CEO of CityMass. Its mobility map platform uses machine learning to help disabled users discover places, find public transport that suits their needs. Finally, we have Faith Lagrange, who leads the local and regional government team of Microsoft UK. And they help public sector bodies use technology and digital transformation to improve their services for citizens. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the statistic that by 2050, almost 70% of the world's population will live in cities. The World Bank estimates that today 15% of the world's population experiences some form of disability. So it's really imperative that cities make themselves inclusive to all. So Joanna, to get us started, what do you think the main barriers are to cities being truly inclusive?
Hi everybody. It's an honour to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Joanna Wooten and I've been asked what do I think the main barriers are to cities being truly inclusive. The reality is it's about the interaction of technology with human behaviour and inclusive design. So I think there's no point in having great technology if LITs don't work. But technology can help LITs to work better, and technology can inform you when LITs are not working so you can plan a different route. So that is where, so you might be able to help people to plan their routes from their homes better. Technology is not going to help a pavement to be smoother, maybe. You need to know that the pavement will be smooth, but maybe they'll tell you when they're not. So I think that interplay of human behaviour and inclusive design is really important. And what a lot of disabled people need is information so they can plan and know where they're going and have alternatives when things go wrong. So, for instance, buses are a really good example. They're diversions. So that you're on the bus, you think you know where you're going, and then they're diverted, and that can be really stressful. If you're visually impaired, where are you going to be getting off? Where is the route going? So, if you're a wheelchair user, what are the best options for you on the new diverting route? And what you need is the information immediately, so you've got options that work for you. You might have a hidden disability, such as anxiety, and you want to go on a route which is not busy. And this is where technology can be really helpful, because you can get real-time information and go and actually go this way, it'll be a bit quieter. So I think that's all great. And I have to mention toilets. Toilets are really important for everybody. Nobody ever talks about them. So you need to know where the loos are. They need to be working. And if they're locked, staff need to let you in. So it's all very well for having smart technology, but if you've got a rude staff member who just makes you feel rubbish, that's not going to help your day. So I think smart cities are potentially brilliant because they can give you control and you can plan ahead. And I know that my panel members will have some really exciting insights to share on there. So I'll let Graham sort it out and hand over to them.
So I guess Faith, from your perspective, given the work that you've been doing with local government, I mean, where are the barriers from your perspective? What are you seeing, I guess, as the obstacles?
Yeah, so I think probably knowledge of the opportunities that are out there. I mean, Joanna is of course absolutely right that there's probably a lot to do in terms of the actual physical infrastructure of cities to make it much more accessible, and that requires planning, and that requires money, that requires all of that additional support. So without even if you've got the most forward-thinking local authority really keen to try and drive this stuff, they actually need the funding and the support to be able to do that. And I think that is something that we should be looking at, particularly post-COVID, of how do we make sure that we really get our cities accessible. There has to be a focus on that physical infrastructure. When it comes to the technology side, I think some of the barriers are really around knowledge of what's out there, and actually knowledge of what's going to be most helpful. So, really making sure that you've got an incredibly inclusive group of people looking at accessibility requirements, rather than, and I would put myself in this category as well, enthusiastic, able-bodied people who want to help and think they've got some really good answers. So I think those are the things that kind of need to be considered.
And Renee, Joanna obviously talked about transport being a big area where there are huge obstacles to accessibility. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, given the work that CityMass has done, do you see transport as one of the main problems, or are there other barriers that you've seen in terms of making cities more accessible? Renee, I'm afraid you're on mute.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I can hear you fine, thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll just say that transportation is one of the basic human needs, right? You have living, you have mobility. Mobility is a mean to the end. You go from A to B to meet your friends, you go to appointments. So it's a very integral part of a human life, and to make it inclusive. And that's, I think all the audience here is aware of the statistics of 40 million and 1 billion people in the world and the aging population. And that's not in a niche, if you like, in the technology world. There's a lot of niche kind of calling, but I wouldn't as a niche. It's a huge amount of people that technology could possibly help if it's done right. Now, we're just picking up transportation from Joanna, that there's a number of points has been mentioned in terms of the information, which correlate to what Faye was talking about, knowledge. Now, I think knowledge, information in the right time, in the hand, and being communicated in the right way that people can consume, and that's the systematic technology. Now that is a complex system that you can involve in inclusive design from the beginning. When you think about, if you're coming to a technology solutions, how do you make sure that you may have picked one of the accessible needs, for example, one of the technology, but is there other technology, other kind of access needs that may be common across different types of disability? Possibly. So is that thought process from right at the beginning, from inclusive design, how to sort of, how to include the end users that your solutions are designed for, to from the beginning, before it goes to usability testing from a design perspective. Now, the other things I picked up from the two panelists is actually the sort of real-time information is necessary. Now, I think technology is great. And for example, if you are going to a normal station, is normally have lift access for wheelchair users, for example, and but at that time the lift is broken, but that information is not communicating in real time when the user is actually going on the journey. That's not useful either, and because that will prevent spontaneous, that kind of equitable transportations for people with different disabilities going. So I think from a technology perspective, if it's done right from the beginning, it's possible to include not just one type of disability, two type of disability, and given the adoptions and utilization of AI and machine learning, personalization could make possible, right? And people with disabilities, they're individuals as well, and it's complex in a way that's within one type of disability, there's different different needs, different degrees of disabilities as well. So I see technology has the capability and potentials to be personalized, that kind of experience for the individuals. But having said that, the journey is long, and 6 months is on that journey, and it's complex. I tell you that the amount of things I'm pulling my hair when I'm brainstorming with my teams and trying to sort of from the design perspective. So, and I think those are the points I would like to sort of elaborate on. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sorry, Graham.
Oh, please, Joanna.
I was thinking it'd be nice to add a couple of things, practical examples in the now.
Please.
One really good app is called Viewer Surface. So and that's a really nice interplay between providing a surface and the need. If you are disabled, you're not able to fill up your car yourself with petrol, there's this app that you can use to find out if assistance is available at the petrol filling station near you. It then rings that petrol filling station. You check that there is somebody there. You get confirmation that there is somebody there, so you don't have a wasted journey. You then arrive at the petrol filling station and you do another notification, all done via your smartphone or a normal phone. If you don't have a smartphone, it informs the person in the garage which fuel pump you're at. So before, people used to get very stressed, so they would have to try and park near the circuit court to try and wave to them and try and get attention. And that's really difficult, particularly if you've got upper mobility or you toot the horn. And now you can be much more discreet. And you've got control over, and it's particularly helpful, I think, if you're going to a garage that you don't know. But what it does, it helps the garage to provide the disabled person with a customised surface, so they have control on both sides. But equally, if everybody's off sick for some reason, they've really got one person in the garage, they can say nobody's available that day for whatever reason. So it's a really nice example of enabling good surface, but also control of the disabled person. I personally have benefited from things like Uber and so on, that you can order taxis, but there have been examples, and I think about organisations listening in, you ought to think about it. Do you tend to have a contract with one taxi company? And if so, are you able to order a taxi in different ways? Because previously, often it would only be by the phone. So I could never order a taxi. I would have to ask colleagues to order a taxi for me. So that mitigates my ability to be independent. But often organisations will say, well, you're not allowed to use any other type of taxi. So you need to think about your procurement processes, whether you are enabling people to make choices that work for them. And that, of course, comes back to making cities smarter, is that flexibility so that people can choose the system that will work best for them. Sorry, over to you, Graham.
No, not at all. I mean, you raise a really good point, I think, from my own experience covering the sector. You will see some companies come forward and talk about how user-friendly their technology is. But I think what some maybe don't realize is that it may be friendly to some users, but it isn't friendly to others. And I think that's important in terms of looking forward. It's vitally important that all of us really make sure accessibility built into cities and what they do. Faith, from your perspective, I guess both touching on the technology aspect, but also, I was interested in your thoughts on how we can make sure accessibility is built into what a city does.
So I think the first point, I think I'd kind of like to make and sort of bring us back to actually is that we keep talking about cities, but this is much wider than cities. I know all of the stats sort of talk about the number of people that live in cities, the number of people that will live in cities, but I actually think COVID has potentially will change that anyway. I think we are, feeling more people potentially moving out of cities. Perhaps you don't have to live in a city to work in certain ways anymore. I live myself in rural Scotland, and I can only imagine how much harder it is for somebody with, disabilities, particularly kind of physical disabilities, to live here and understand how to get around. And I think it's really important that we don't ignore the fact that probably rural communities are less well served even than city-based communities. Yeah. In this way. And I think it's really important. And I know I've worked with soccer team for a long time, and many of my soccer team colleagues, we talk about place and place-based approach. Now that might well take into account the city, but it's also got to take into account people living more rurally and how they actually access some of these services, because there could be an even greater digital divide, and that really is a barrier to them being able to really take up that kind of technology, even when it's available. So I guess that's kind of the first point. And then when you think about making accessibility built in, I mean, that's kind of Microsoft's approach with everything. Any of our tools, we make sure that we are thinking about when we're developing teams, when we start developing, how could people with disabilities be able to utilize it, be able to get a rich experience. But I think the really important thing is to make sure that, and Joanna touched on the procurement, if you want it to be accessible, you've got to procure accessible. You've got to have that in your procurement process, is to make sure that you are detailing that there is scoring against accessibility criteria in what you're buying, and then it will become built in. I think the other thing is representation. I've said it before, it can't be procured by just people like me. It has to have a broad group of inclusive teams that can really advise on that. And I give a really good example around one of our partners, Soundscape, which is it's an app with a really kind of rich audio mixed reality to help people who are blind to be able to get around a city. But it isn't just a functional experience. It's not just about navigation. It's about pointing out beauty spots. It's about kind of pointing out where there's leisure, where things have changed. Because we would think about functionally how to get around a city, but actually somebody who is blind wants to understand if their favorite coffee house has expanded or has moved, or, that's really important as well. That's how we get around, and that's how we live. And the last thing I would say is ask for feedback and welcome criticism, because we are doing a lot of stuff here that's potentially new, and it won't always work and it won't always hit the mark. And if we're defensive about it when that is pointed out, then we will just shut down the conversation, and we won't get those really rich, inclusive experiences in all of our places that we live. So I think, you have to actually actively ask for criticism and then be willing to act on it. Yeah.
I have to admit, as a journalist, constructive criticism is a huge part of the job. So I'm conscious, obviously, we only have a couple of minutes left. So Renee, obviously with CityMass, that's an example, I guess, of building an accessibility from the ground up. What advice would you give to other technology companies, or even to public sector bodies, to ensure that they make sure that technology is that accessible?
Those are very key questions, Graham. Especially, I tackled the second one first, in terms of the government procurement side of things. And I think there's always a struggle with the budget cuts in terms of, will the government's able to have a broad team of inclusive members when they come into the procurement process? The practical terms of things, would they be able to sort of go through? I'm literally going through a project at the moment, working with a local government, and there's when we brainstorm how the project can go about, how can we do it from the design, from the ground up, have a focus group, understand the pain points to all the way to formulating an idea and testing with them and reiterate, etc. All of this whole process of technology development, product development, if you like. There's this. I mean, it's a fine line between you're able to and you would like to, and it's always a life struggle within the reality. And I think only when there is this is a top agenda, this is a recognized pain points for local governments, that if they don't do that later, if they have to sort of comply, if you like, if you don't do that voluntarily and later there's compliance coming in, then there'll be much more cost. But again, this human natures of short-term versus long-term, all of this, it's really up to the government to really think longer term, as in the short term.
Exactly.
Short term.
And I guess with sorry, just to bring in Joanna, I guess one thing that's important as well is incorporating the opinion and feedback of disability groups. I think of cities like Chester in the UK or Young Shopping in Sweden. They work very, very closely with disability groups from the inception of public projects. Sure, I guess in your view, that is critical to making cities successful.
I'd agree with that. It is important to include a range of disabled people and not to assume that one visually impaired person represents every visually impaired person as well. So it is important to think about the spectrum. I mean, I think also you have to think about when you're including them. Are you including them as part of the procurement stage? You can think about getting your spec right. Are you including them in thinking about evaluating tenders, or do you just tell them when you've bought it, when it's a bit late? And sometimes you're going to have to make a judgment call. And I also think you need to think about, if you're a large employer, and some people here will be with large employers, you're going to have a lot of disabled people in your workforce who could help you. You don't always have to go external. And you can use them at an initial starting point. You could then go external later. But if you're thinking smart, there are ways of doing things. You may have staff networks. Also, a lot of your employees will have family members with different impairments as well. So I think you can think laterally and creatively about how you get this input. Yes, have formal panels as well. Yes, think about paying and working with charities too. But you've got resources on your doorstep often, use them.
Exactly. I mean, I think that, cities really showcase the best of diversity, but in order to truly thrive, they need to be accessible for all. We could talk about this for hours. It's a fascinating area, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. I'd like to thank Joanna, Renee and Faith. There's been some really excellent insight here, and I hope you've all learned from it. And obviously, thank you for joining us first thing.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Thank you to all the panel. There's not a great chance for questions. There's quite an active conversation going on the chat. If you are able to kind of join in on that, just a couple of the key themes before we move on. There's a lot of conversation about that element around place and, what does that mean? We certainly talk about cities. There's some rural councils here who are kind of going, don't forget about us. We don't want to be left behind from that equation as well. Faith, you touched on the challenges of those things. And, those points about representation and inclusivity have gone down really well. And, it is something that we all need to be a bit more conscious of. So, yeah, my thanks to the panel for their sessions. And if you can stay and have a look at some of the conversations and answer them, that will be great.